Hello, I'm David Speers. In this episode of our series on the backstories of Australian politics, we take a look at the momentous events that took place right here on these steps on Remembrance Day 1975. The end of the Whitlam government crashed across the Australian political landscape like a thunderstorm. Literally out of the blue, the Governor-General bundled Whitlam and his government out of office in a stinging political coup that changed politics in Australia forever. A coup the history books remember simply as the Dismissal.
Nothing will save the Governor-General.
November the 11th, 1975, Remembrance Day, as the nation paused to remember the 62,000 fallen soldiers of World War I. In the corridors of Government House in Canberra, Governor-General Sir John Kerr prepared an ambush. Whitlam suspected nothing as he made his way to Yarralumla seeking a half-Senate election, confident an election would end the standoff over the budget bills sitting unpassed by the coalition-dominated upper house. There, opposition leader Malcolm Fraser sat waiting, hidden away, some say in Yarralumla's kitchen. Whitlam claimed later the conversation with Kerr began amicably as he raised the subject of the election, until Kerr handed him a letter with the words, "I should give you this first." The letter turned out to be a proclamation sacking the Prime Minister, read later on the steps of the Parliament by Kerr's private secretary, David Smith.
Proclamation by His Excellency the Governor-General of Australia.
Whitlam's words to the Governor-General are not recorded, but he left immediately to return to the lodge for lunch.
No one knew what was going on. No one knew that Malcolm had gone up there. No one knew that what Kerr had done. No one knew anything about Gough. They adjourned for lunch. Gough went to the lodge to have lunch, as I remember, and Brian George was the butler. Margaret Whitlam was in Sydney. And Gough, being Gough, had told no one what had happened. And I understand he was having a steak. And Brian George, who had a wonderful sense of humour, said something to the effect, "How are you, sir?" And Gough just looked up matter-of-factly and said, "Oh, the bastard sacked me."
The plot to oust the government of Edward Gough Whitlam had its genesis in the coalition party rooms here in this building. The opposition resolved to use its majority in the Senate to block supply, the mechanism that gives the government the money to run the nation. On the 19th of October it moved, demanding a House of Representatives election as a condition for passing the money bills. In secret discussions, opposition leader Malcolm Fraser began negotiating with the Labor-appointed Governor-General and former Chief Justice of New South Wales, Sir John Kerr. Whitlam and his Attorney-General, Jim McClelland, regarded Kerr to be a reliable Labor man, one of the Balmain boys.
If he'd given me a say, I wouldn't have trusted him in the barge pole. I mean, for a start, never trust a drunk. And he was a total drunk. He couldn't stay sober for 5 minutes. And so I don't think you can ever trust someone who's in that category, let alone make them Governor-General. So that was just a huge mistake on the part of McClelland and Whitlam, who were the main two, I think. They got it wrong.
Few people outside Malcolm Fraser's inner circle knew of the unfolding drama of that momentous day in Australia's political history.
And Billy McMahon's come in. And Billy, I'll never forget this, Billy McMahon said, "They've sacked him. They've sacked him." And everyone, "Oh, Billy, shut up, will you? We've got work to do. They've sacked him." And none of us took Billy very seriously. How the hell he knew, I've got no idea, but that was the first we knew something was on. They sacked him.
As news of Kerr's coup crossed Canberra, workers downed tools to race to Parliament House. They gathered in an electrified atmosphere, both outside and inside the House.
The major recollection of the day is the crowds just, look, it was scary. Even the MPs had no idea what was going on or what might happen. No one knew what might happen. And when everyone said, the word got round, you should see out the front, no one could get out the front because the Great Hall was packed. I remember Gough came in and he gave that victory salute like this. Well, the MPs went out on the Senate side, where there's a balcony, to just see these seething mobs of people that come from everywhere. I mean, they weren't 10 deep, they were 50 deep. You couldn't see a piece of concrete. And here they were, and they saw them up there and they knew they were Liberal coalition senators, and this mob of Jackie R singlets putting their hands up and jump, 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 that's saying like this, jump. In other words, I think the enduring image of the day is of, you didn't know what was going to happen. No one knew what was going to happen.
Parliament resumed after the luncheon adjournment, and the Labor government may still have had a chance to retain power.
When the House of Representatives resumed, Kim Beazley was at the dispatch box. So the government was still in government. And of course, Beazley had the call. Now, technically, had Beazley read from the telephone book for the next 3 days, they had the numbers, they could never have sat him down. So it would have been a greater constitutional crisis than already existed, in that Malcolm Fraser had been commissioned and sworn in as Prime Minister, albeit acting on the terms that the Governor-General had spelled out, but he wouldn't have been able to exercise that authority. He didn't have the numbers on the floor of the House.
As the crowd outside continued to swell, Gough Whitlam made 3 impassioned speeches on the floor of the House.
As I recall it, one of them called upon the Speaker to call upon the Governor-General and invite the Honourable Member for Werriwa, which was Gough, to form a government. The Governor-General refused to take the Speaker's phone call. So that came to nothing. The Speaker left the chair, an acting Speaker came into the chair, Scholes has gone out to ring the Governor-General, Governor-General won't take the call.
More than 4 hours after the official dismissal of the Whitlam government, David Smith made his way to the Parliament to deliver in full the Governor-General's proclamation.
And then we went out into the Great Hall. Well, it was terrifying. This is the old Parliament House. It was absolutely packed. And David Smith, who had to read the proclamation that the House was being dissolved in order to call an election, for an election to be called, David Smith was to read the proclamation on the floor of the House, but he couldn't get in. So they brought Smith through the kitchen, which was just extraordinary. And Smith was a little fellow, David Smith. And so here were these teeming masses of people. I remember being with John Wilson, who was working with me then, and he made some stupid comment, John. I said, look, shut up, mate, you'll get your head bashed in here. You just don't commit what side you're on, because these people were seething as to what had happened. The hero had been done over by John Kerr. Smith then came through the kitchens, which were, the front of the house was there, and the Great Hall. You walk up the steps and there was the Great Hall and whatever. And he's come through the kitchens on the left-hand side and weaved his way through and gone to the bottom of the steps and read the proclamation. Gough, that was when Gough knew what was on, and this great big, Gough was a towering figure, and he's walked through that cheering Gough, and he's gone down and he's leant over the shoulders of David Smith.
The Governor-General of Australia do, by this my proclamation, dissolve the Senate and the House of Representatives. Given under my hand and the Great Seal of Australia on the 11th of November 1975, by His Excellency's command, Malcolm Fraser, Prime Minister, John R. Kerr, Governor-General. God save the Queen.
Well, may we say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor-General. The proclamation, which you have just heard read by the Governor-General's official secretary, was countersigned Malcolm Fraser. Who will undoubtedly go down in Australian history from Remembrance Day 1975 as Kerr's Kerr.
How will history remember the reign of Edward Gough Whitlam?
Gough was inspirational. He inspired Australia in a way that not many of our Prime Ministers have ever done. He had great vision, phenomenal vision, and so he did things with heritage legislation and divorce and things that have lasted, that say, okay, this guy knew what he was doing. But he was a terrible manager of men. And they were all men. So that's not a sexist remark, that's just how it was at the time. He was a terrible manager of men. He didn't like to bother with it. And so as a cabinet leader, he was terrible.
And his challenger, John Malcolm Fraser.
But I do not believe that Malcolm Fraser was behind the scenes conspiring with Kerr to get rid of Whitlam, give me the gig, I'll call an election. He just wasn't that sort of bloke, Malcolm.
No, it changed the way politics operated because there'd been a lot of cross-pollinisation, you know. Prior to those days, it was common in the parliamentary bar for Liberals and Labor people to share a drink and a meal, etc. Never after that did it happen.
In our next episode from the Vietnamese capital, Hanoi, we'll look at Australia's political relationship with the United States, the strains of the Vietnam War, and we'll examine the conspiracy theory that the CIA may have contributed to the crisis of the dismissal.